Not only is he the voice of the Double-A Tennessee Smokies, he's been calling Cubs spring training action since 2011. Joining us today to talk Cubs baseball, the very talented Mick Gillispie. Locked on Cubs coming at you now.
You are Locked On Cubs, your daily Chicago Cubs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Thursday to you. Welcome in. I'm Andrew Bellison. This is indeed Locked On Cubs. Thank you for making us your first listen each and every morning. Privileged to be joined by the voice of the Double-A Tennessee Smokies and a longtime member of the Chicago Cubs organization, Mick Gillispie. Mick, good morning. Thank you for taking the time on a busy road trip in between workouts here this morning.
Yeah. Look, I mean, you are very presentable, and for those that are looking at me right now, they're probably going, "What is this guy? It looks like he's ready to play some baseball." But I've got a workout coming up next, so kind of slid this in here. But always love to talk Cubs baseball. Great to talk to you.
Let's dive right in. Cubs are off to a good start. Took 2 or 3 from the Brewers in the opening series. Beat Pittsburgh yesterday. It's been the Seiya Suzuki show early on. I mean, you saw him in Mesa. Tell me one reason why this could continue for the Cubs and one reason why, hey, they're off to a good start, but they're just not ready yet to compete.
Yeah, you know what? I was broadcasting with Coomdog, with Ron Coomer, when Suzuki hit his first ever Cubs home run, and it was his first hit, right? It was a spring training home run, so it was pretty funny watching that ball fly out, and then talking about the call in between innings with Ron Coomer, and laughing about it. I'm look, if maybe he's the real deal. I mean, off to an awesome start. I think the Cubs could be competitive this year. I think one of the reasons that they might be competitive long term is pitching. I like what they did with the bullpen, and I think that there's a lot of really good late inning relievers that are in the organization that could join what they already have. We're kind of seeing some of these young guys like Robertson get into games. We knew about him from the minor leagues. But there's some more guys that are just as good, and I'm guessing that eventually that they'll be up when needed. That's one thing. The other is maybe Frank Schwindel and Patrick Wisdom are the real deal. And if the Cubs get production from those two guys, Ian Happ off to a great start. We've seen this with him before. Yeah. It'll give them the ability to compete over the long haul. Loved seeing them take 2 out of 3 from Milwaukee. And, we know the Pirates aren't that good this year. What the Cubs have to do is they have to win these games against teams like the Pirates, like the Reds, that you look on paper and go, okay, they're rebuilding, and take advantage of those opportunities.
You saw Suzuki firsthand in Mesa. We've got a little small sample size of him early on. There's always the argument when guys come over from Japan, is their game going to translate, to the major league level, to the major league game? What do you see from him where you say, yeah, absolutely, it's going to translate?
Yeah, I mean, remember when Fukudomi came over and joined the Cubs? We were wondering, how good is Fukudomi going to be, and he was streaky, but he struggled. I don't know. I mean, I was just watching to see how his bat speed would play against, pitching in MLB that, every guy throws like 95, 96, 97, right?
Yeah.
And what we're seeing is that so far, he's able to hit that. So they throw a lot of off-speed pitch and a lot of breaking balls in Japan. So, I figured he'd be able to do that. But Ichiro Suzuki showed us that you can come over from their league and play in this league and you can compete. And I love it. I love the fact that Major League Baseball is like the top league for baseball, and that guys from Japan and all over the world want to come to the U.S. and Canada to compete. It really does. The diversity makes it a lot of fun to watch. I love the culture that that he's brought. He hits a home run and he's they're bowing on the way home. So hopefully that continues. It's such a small sample size. It's hard for me to say, okay, yeah, over the course of an entire season, what's it going to look like? But Shohei Ohtani's maybe the best player in baseball right now. I mean, his teammate Mike Trout could argue with that, but he just slid over from Japan as well. So I'm going to guess that if you said, hey, make a prediction here, I'm going to say that Suzuki is it's going to do well for the Cubs.
Speaking of small sample size, spring training was a little goofy this year because of the lockout, shortened and condensed. I know you guys kind of went through that in 2020 with the COVID stuff and whatnot, but what are some of the factors that went into spring this year, having it be so condensed that we might not realize because we weren't there in terms of preparation, et cetera, et cetera? I don't want to say rush, but it was almost a little rushed.
Yeah, and this was something that Ron Coomer and I talked about a lot as well while we were there. There's always this big debate, and you mentioned, I guess, 2011 was my first Cubs spring training. It's hard to believe it was that long ago. And we used to do the webcast, and Len Casper, when he was with the Cubs, and I would do all the games. And a lot of people have reached out and said, hey, I missed this webcast. Maybe we'll do it again someday. But it was so much fun because I would be there for the entire time. So you're right. I kind of have a perspective on spring training. And it seems like what happens is you get to about, I don't know, maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks to go, and the players, some of them start to complain that they're just ready for the regular season to start. Mm-hmm. But what the difference is this year is that you didn't have that. I know it was condensed, but because of the lockout, the pitchers and catchers didn't get there around Valentine's Day, and then have that runway to get things started. So they probably could have used another week or two this year. And I don't know how that's going to affect the league, but my thought is that, some teams are going to do better with the expanded rosters. And I think the Cubs are one of those teams. I think that they're going to benefit from having those extra guys. I think other teams, let's say like the Yankees, probably are going to do better without it because, they have more top end players. And once, that kind of shrinks back down again, that'll benefit them over the long term. I mean, and you saw it with the Cubs odds, like when they expanded the roster, the Cubs odds got better, and so I paid close attention to that. So that's kind of my gut feeling. Jed Hoyer and his guys are so good at like seeing something like this and figuring out how to use it as an advantage. And so my prediction is that when the rosters, in May, when they go, they slim back down again, I think you're going to see some teams start to do this and some teams start to do this.
And tell me I'm wrong here, Mick. I think that's a great point you make. The same can be said with the designated hitter in the National League now. I mean, I think a lot of NL clubs are going to benefit from not having a pitcher in the box, but with the Cubs' depth and the outfield and the guys that they can slot into that role, I feel like it benefits them maybe more than some other clubs in the National League.
Yeah. I mean, I've got so many opinions on this. I look, I'm surprised, first off, that there hasn't been more pushback on fundamentally changing the National League game, which was baseball forever. And then, of course, the American League did it first. And then now we don't have the pitchers hitting anymore. And I realize like the pitchers, haven't been great hitters, but the game is so different now without it. I miss that game. I mean, listen, I've been a Cubs fan since I was a kid, watching the Cubs on television, Harry Carey and Steve Stone. I remember getting my first Cubs hat. I've got a picture. I was in middle school. But I grew up in an American League city in Baltimore. And so, when we would go to the game, we had the DH. And for a long time, I thought, why would we want the pitchers to bat? But then as I started to get into playing baseball, and then, watching the National League game, I realized the National League game is so much better because every person on the bench is needed every single game. In the American League, I mean, you bury guys who don't play a whole lot because, certain managers might not ever use a pinch hitter. It's kind of, one of those things in the AL, like you might see it, but you might not, right?
Mhm.
In the NL, every single game, it's like, hey, when do I bring the pinch hitters in? Love the double switch. The utility guy is important. It's a better fundamental game when the pitchers had to hit because of all of the things that you do and also managing.
Yeah.
How fun was it watching Joe Madden, do his thing with all of the switches, and in the minor leagues, we've had some really good managers, including Ryan Sandberg.
Yeah.
It's funny to see kind of how Rhino, when he managed the Smokies in 2010, how he would attack the double switch, because we played with that down here when two NL teams would play each other. But with that said, I'm definitely in the minority because no one really has stood up and said, "Hey, you know what? What are we doing here?" And I don't think we'll ever see it again. So, maybe I should just feel lucky that I got to, live in a time where I got both. I got the NL style and the AL style. But as far as it goes to the Cubs, you're right. It was another thing that when they changed the rule, the Cubs' odds got better, and it makes guys valuable who might, like hitters like Andre Dawson, like the Hawk, one of my favorite Cubs. It got to the point where it was really tough for him to play the field because of his knees, but he could still hit. One guy, and I was thinking about him the other day. I saw Len Casper in spring training, and I was telling him that as a kid I caught Harold Baines's 297th home run. It was a grand
Nice.
slam. I still have the
Nice.
ball, and I told Len, I said, "Hey, if you run into him," and this is before I even knew about his double transplant. I didn't realize he had health issues. I just, I have a piece of his history, and I'm like, hey, one day, if I can meet him, I'd love for him to have this for someone in his family. But he's got to meet me. We got to talk about it. This isn't for sale. This is, it's got to be it's got to be something that is treasured as much or more to someone in his family as it is for me. But I was telling him, Harold Baines is one of the great, and of course he was a Sox amongst other teams, but he was one of the great DHs of all time. And it's like I remember watching him hit, and as a kid, like just being in awe at his ability to bat with two strikes. The way that he could change his swing, and it was a thing of beauty. So I'm kind of hoping that that's what the position turns into. Where you get guys like Harold Baines or Andre Dawson, who was my favorite Cub, get them maybe a prolonged career.
Mhm.
And then for this team now, I think that it helps because now you can put, Ian Happ in the lineup, and you don't have to have him in the field, right?
Yeah.
And as much as I like Ian and the things that he does, sometimes defensively, he's kind of like this,
Sure.
up and down, but to me, he's always a good hitter. Even I know he's had the strikeout issues, but I really like having him in the lineup. So you get guys like that in there on certain days, and maybe give them a rest in the field, keep guys fresh. That's definitely something that would play for them. And I guess we'll see what happens. But I think that it definitely makes the Cubs a more formidable team scoring, and I feel like the pitching's going to be there. So I guess that's why it would help them.
I love your Harold Baines reference. I'd love to see that ball. That's so cool, first and foremost. As a kid growing up in the Chicago suburbs, I throw lefty and hit righty. I was so ticked that Mark Grace and Harold Baines hit left-handed, and I didn't too. And I just wanted to be as smooth as they were. And obviously I never was. But watching them, man, growing up, it's like, God, how do they make this look so easy?
Oh, man, I loved Gracie too. I had the Mark Grace T-shirt I used to wear to school. They would call me. I lived in Hightstown, New Jersey, for a while too, and they would call me the Cubs kid, because I had the hat and the shirt. Never thought that I'd be involved with the Cubs professionally. And honestly, I almost wish that I was with another organization just because I love the Cubs too much, probably.
Yeah.
Probably should have moved on years ago, but it's like. It's just something special about the C, man. I remember I learned how to play first base because of Grace. But
Me too.
Yeah, like I'm right-handed first baseman. Definitely not him, but
Yeah.
like I got the first baseman's mitt, and we get out there, and I had the T-shirt. I can still see it was like a black T-shirt, and it had like like a caricature of him on there. Yeah, what man, those were some great days too.
Yes.
Yeah, wiffle
Yes.
ball in the backyard,
Yes.
emulate those swings.
Absolutely. I love it. I want to talk about another potential big time change in the game here in a sec. Before we do, I want to remind everyone betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting stats and information all season long. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of the Major League Baseball season. BetOnline, your continued source for all your sports wagering information. BetOnline, where the game starts. I'm 35 years old, but I feel like the curmudgeon in me comes out. This DH talk is one of the things that gets me going. I miss the bullpens down the line at Wrigley Field, and now we've got this PitchCom technology that I want to rack your brain about. And for those that don't know about it, it's a digital pitch calling technology between pitcher and catcher, where catcher essentially wears a wristband, dials up the pitch and location, and it goes into the receiver in the pitcher's ear, eliminating the traditional finger signals, and in hopes of improving the pace of play, which is an issue at the major league level, no doubt, and also sign stealing. Now, I think this is not. It wouldn't be tops on my list. I think it takes the gamesmanship away. I think it compromises the integrity of the game. But you may have seen this in action at spring training this year, and if not, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot. I mean, I guess going back to just playing baseball, and I've always been good at, and I don't even know how, honestly. Like I'm going to tell you this, but I can watch guys. I can pick up guys tipping pitches. Um, sometimes I can figure out what the signs are. I used to be the guy on the team that would, come up with the when you're at second base, like we would steal the signs, and if it was like, hey, if I'm yelling your last name,
Yep.
then look fastball. If I'm yelling your first name, then it's their curveball or a change, whatever.
Yeah.
So I've been guilty of that as well, and I agree with you that it is gamesmanship, and I've always felt that if it happens on the field, then it's fine, but the Astros won a World Series using technology illegally. Who knows how many other teams were involved in this? I'm guessing that they're not the only one. I'm glad that the Cubs haven't been, haven't been fingered at all for cheating, but, there's a video I'm watching, after that World Series that John Boy had, and, you're seeing Altuve come around third, and it seems like he's got some kind of electronic device on his chest. As long as you have the technology that you have now, and we watch games every night. I mean, we've got center field cameras that put you right there.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a tendency to cheat, and that's why I don't mind the technology. Like if you can type it in on your wrist and it tells the catcher, and it maybe makes it tougher for opponents to steal signs in this day and age, then that's just where we are right now. Like it's the same thing to me as instant replay, or something that I'm a big proponent of is the robot umpire, the strike zone, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you a story. And if you ever run into Ryan Sandberg, you can ask him about this. We were in the 2000, and it was actually 2009. We were in the 2009 championship game, and this umpire hated Rhino. They had a big rivalry. A guy named Chris Ward, and I'll say this until my entire career. If he hears this, he knows it's true. All of a sudden, at the end of the game, we're about to win game one. He won't call strike three to end the game, and a guy hits a home run, and we lose. And I'm telling you right now, the guy ties it with a home run, and then they did some other stuff in the extra innings where they called the teams back on the field after there was an out called off at first base, and it was just very odd stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I know that in that game, I remember some of the Cubs front office people were there, and we all kind of met afterwards to talk about it over a beer, and we were all just stunned because we watched an umpire steal that game from us, and we lost the series. And I just think that in the big leagues with guys like Angel Hernandez, who might not be doing it on purpose. He just isn't very good at, calling balls and strikes. I mean, let's be honest here. He
Right.
stinks. I love taking the human element out of the game, just because it always goes back to that series to me in 2009. And I'm like, how many games are determined by an umpire's bias? They okay, well, this guy's a veteran, so he's going to have a different strike zone than a rookie. I don't believe in that. I think there's one strike zone. You call it. That's how it should be. And the less that they have an influence on in a game, the better to me, right? So the instant replay has taken out, some of the awful calls, like the one where the guy's throwing a perfect game, right? Galarraga, I forget his first name, and the last out's recorded, and the umpire says the guy's safe, and he's like this far off the bag, and that was a pure accident. It was just bad positioning, but at the same time, it was fixed that fast. I love taking the human element away from the umpires. I know that these guys, a lot of them, are really good. When you do big league games compared to the minors, there's a huge step up. And then when I do college games, from time to time, it's like enormous. And you realize how really good these umpires are for the most part. But if you can get it, perfect, why wouldn't you? So that's what technology gives us. So I guess I'm a fan of it as long as, as long as it doesn't slow the game down a whole lot.
Mick Gillispie is our guest here on Locked On Cubs, fine voice of the Tennessee Smokies, been part of the Cubs organization for many, many years. Locked On Cubs, free and available wherever you source your favorite cast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I want to shuffle over to some of this younger talent that the Cubs system is suddenly ripe with. Kind of started with that Darvish deal a couple of seasons ago, and then the core last year. And these names, that came back, the Killians and the Pete Crow Armstrongs and the Brennan Davis is homegrown guy. But paint us a picture. I mean, what popped for you with some of these young studs that we're now seeing in this farm system that was just a few years ago somewhat depleted, but now seems to be one of the bigger assets of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, this is, for me, I mean, I've been around a long time. You take all of the Cubs broadcasters, and you just kind of made me think of this. Now that Len's with the Sox and Dean Ellis has retired in Iowa, I'm the longest tenured broadcaster in the Cubs system right now, which is amazing, right? And I've been with the team since 2007. So I've seen a lot of baseball. I've seen a lot of minor leagues. First off, I felt like when Theo Epstein took over as the president of the Cubs, he was very critical of the Cubs minor league system at the time, right? Trashed it, and Jim Hendry took a lot of, took a really a fall basically because of that. And I thought that some of that was unfair, I didn't think that the system was that bad. They didn't have the top end prospects, but Jim also wasn't allowed to lose 4 straight years, as many games as he could in the big leagues to stockpile talent. The biggest difference to me in the entire Cubs organization, and I feel like fans are too tough on Tom Ricketts and the Ricketts family. I read the stuff on Twitter, and just having been around it behind the scenes, that we should be thanking our lucky stars every day that the Ricketts family owns the team, plain and simple. The organization, when it was owned by the Tribune, was an absolute joke. They would go into the drafts, and the scouts would tell me this, and the guys that they wanted to take, which a lot of them became big league stars, or we're not going to pay that guy, or he's with this agent, so we're not doing that, and then when Tom Ricketts came in, all that ended. He's like, hey, we're going to invest in the minor leagues, and we're going to build up, and that's exactly what they've done. And that's something that he and his family and his ownership style have really wanted to put a focus on. And then there were some guys. I mean, the biggest difference between what we had before, Theo took over, and what we had after was the first round picks. The top end guys were just so much better than the other players that I would see. Like Javi Baez was actually drafted. Tim Wilkin, who's now with Arizona, one of the great all-time scouts.
Mm-hmm.
I think he just got into the Scouts Hall of Fame. I think he did. But anyway, this guy's amazing, man. And when you're talking about behind the scenes and you want to talk baseball, Tim Wilkin is like this. It's crazy. I mean, he's telling me before they drafted Baez, they thought they thought he was going to be there, and Tim's saying like, hey, man, I've watched this guy and I'm picturing him in the backyard, like, practicing, catching the ball and flipping it behind his back, and he's like, you're going to love this guy. And man, of the Cubs, I still love Baez. Like he's right. Like every day you see something with him that you've never seen before, right? But it started with him, and then Chris Bryant, was like the second pick in the draft or something, and then you go on, and all of those guys were home runs. Kyle Schwarber, the way that they took him, but the rest of the system was not that good. Like it was like one, you had like these really amazing prospects, and then the Cubs had this, they had a system that was that went from being a real blue collar system to being a system for a decade where they became elitist. Guys didn't really want to play anymore. Like besides those superstar prospects, right? And then you look at it, like they might have like a handful of guys that got to the big leagues, and then what about all the rest of them, right? And before, we would see like, I don't know, like 15 guys from each Smokies team get to the big leagues, the Double-A. They lost a lot of really great player development people to other organizations that poached those guys from the Cubs, and then they would go other places, and then they didn't do a really good job, in my opinion, of finding elite guys to replace them. And that's something that I got to give Jed Hoyer a lot of credit on right now. There is a big shift in that aspect of things. The elitism that I saw, the entitlement that I saw in the system where I was, it was very disturbing as far as like, if you're trying to develop guys to be the next wave, that's gone now, so be patient with Jed, and know that like there's definitely a fresh wave coming. And then obviously, look, I mean, we traded away our heroes, man. The guys that got us a World Series ring, like the guys who finally helped us erase that, the gut wrenching 84 season, which you probably don't remember, but you do remember 03. 89, all these years where we're like, this is it, and it doesn't happen. And those were the guys. 2007 and 2008 were really hard too. You get in the playoffs and don't win a game, and 1 year you're the best team in the league. But so they better get talent back. I don't know. I haven't seen these guys enough to really say, hey, let me give you my opinion, my breakdown on them. Like I can tell you that the players who I think are going to make an impact next for the Cubs are the Kane Eckerts and the Ben Leapers, back end relief guys who have elite stuff. Scott Efros was a guy. I don't know that he has elite stuff, but I'll tell you what, the guy can pitch every single day, and he was getting killed down in the minor leagues, and then he went sidearm, and it's awesome because he's such a good guy. To watch him in the big leagues, like just ringing dudes up and just being so good. So I can tell you that Brennan Davis will be a player for the Cubs. I think he'll be an everyday player eventually. He's got some things to work on in his game. He's not ready to be there yet. But he's a smart kid. He's a leader. I'm curious to see how he progresses and what happens, with him. Nelson Velasquez is a player that the Smokies have right now. This guy he's got big time potential. He's an outfielder with the ability to hit for average. He hits for power. He had 20 home runs last year. He's just a force in the lineup. He has good at bats. Just has that look to him, and I could see him being in the big leagues this year. So we'll see what happens. Now, as far as all the guys that they traded for, see, one of the biggest differences now, and you know this, than what it used to be, is that when you make a trade, teams, aren't ownership. You can't go to your owner and be like, hey, look, we're going to make a deal right now, and we're going to give up our 1, 2, and 3 prospects that are in, that are a year away from being in the big leagues. Teams don't like doing that, right? How tough is it to, when the Cubs made some deals and they gave up Gleyber Torres, and then he goes to the big leagues and tears it up the next year, right? And then Eloy Jimenez and what he's done, it's like what teams do now is they'll say, all right, well, we'll trade someone, but it's someone that's 18 years old that's not going to be in the big leagues. They still have 3 or 4 years of development before we see them. And so, with Pete Crow Armstrong, who the Cubs got in the Baez deal from New York, I saw him in spring training, and that's really the perspective that I have. And he looked good to me. I mean, like, he moves, there's a slickness to him. It looks like he's got it, but I'm curious to see how he progresses, because he's not here. Maybe in the second half of the season, he'll be up here. But I do feel like that some of these guys are going to hit. And I think that, like, since steroids have been out of the game of baseball, it's a young man's game now. And so I see, like, teams like the Reds, and they go out and they trade some of these guys that were really productive, Winker and Suarez, and, and everybody's upset with them. And then I'm looking at their team and I'm going, okay, wait a second. You got Hunter Green, who's Nolan Ryan, right? And if you haven't seen him yet, guys, he throws 100 every pitch. And I mean, it's crazy. 103, and then he gets tired and throws like 99. Like, this guy's so good. Nick Lodolo, who's a left-hander that's going to be in their rotation. They trade away some stars and they get back more pitching. I see this game plan, and I'm like, okay, that tends to play out too. How do the teams like the A's and the Rays continue to compete, right? It's because they're able to go out and and make deals and bring the right guys back in. I'm going to tell you a prediction that I have about the trade where Matt Olson went to Atlanta. I don't know all the players that the Braves sent to Oakland, but one guy's name is Shea Langoliers. He's the catcher. I'm watching him last year, and I'm thinking, like, if I'm the Cubs, I'm going to trade whatever I have to right now, including Willie, who I love, but to get this guy, because I think that this guy is going to be a superstar. And I told Ken Korak, the voice of the A's, over dinner, I said, this may be one day the Shea Langoliers trade and not the Matt Olson trade. He loves Matt Olson, and what he did for Oakland, but there's guys like that out there, and it's a 3-pronged thing. You got to identify them, you have to get them in your system, and then you have to develop them. And I just feel like the Cubs right now have a lot of momentum in those areas. So without saying, hey, I don't want to give you a prediction on players I haven't seen yet, because I haven't seen them. But at the same time, I can tell you by going back over and looking at what Jed Hoyer's doing and the direction that the farm system's in. I'll tell you one big change that I love is that for years the Cubs minor leagues not only were they ranked high because of great players, but they also were really competitive. Like, they were always in the playoffs. They winning was always something that we did in the minor leagues. And then all of a sudden it just turned into a rec league. I mean, it was like the worst teams in the league, like, they'd be like, well, you know what, so-and-so's pitching, and the game didn't matter, and that has changed. Like, they're keeping score again. They're competitive again, and it's not just the Smokies throughout the system. I just don't know how and this is just me. Now, look, I'm not a GM that's won, 3 championships or anything. So, I mean, who am I to say, other than a guy that just has played baseball and been around the game since I was, 5 years old. I don't know how you play the game and try not to win or don't care if you win. I think that a fundamental flaw of a player is when they don't realize it's not always about your stat. It's about doing the little things that it takes to win a game. And you should always want to win. I'm associated with Alabama. That's where I went to school. I host, my football pregame show. There's nothing that Alabama tries to lose in except women's basketball. I don't know why women's basketball is that sport, but everything else, you want to win. And it's like, I just think that when you instill that mentality, when Alabama walks on the field and people watching this, even in Chicago or across the world, are going to know, you better bring your A game. I don't care what sport it is. With the Cubs system, it got to the point where, we were kind of like, like the Cubs were for years, lovable losers, except we weren't that lovable. It was hard to watch, and it was frustrating. And a lot of people were frustrated, including the players, because they want to win and they want to be managed to win and they want the organization to push to win. And, you have to do certain things to protect the players, because obviously you want them to get to the big leagues and be healthy and all that stuff. But at the same time, having a winner's mentality is something that I think you develop from the minute that they take this hat and put it on their head. And I really feel like Jed Hoyer and his crew are working in that direction. And I'm proud to say that. I mean, look, I think that's a really good positive trait.
You touched on a great point, Mick. A couple more minutes with Mick Gillispie here on Locked On Cubs. I think one of the things that impressed me most when Carter Hawkins had his intro press conference in October is the organizational uniformity that he wanted to establish from top to bottom. Get everyone on the same page. Listen, you said it. There is a right way and a wrong way to do things, and this is how we're going to do it moving forward.
Yeah, look, I mean, he's awesome. I'm excited about the way that things are. It's running an organization is really difficult. And I'll tell you what's surprising to me, I guess just because I've been around it so long, is how a lot of fans don't even know, and even some people that are around the game don't even know how much goes into that. Like you see a guy that shows up and starts playing baseball for your team, he's over at third base. How did he get there? There's a lot of steps in that, and a lot of really smart people are contributing to the success that a team has on the field. 2016 was amazing because I just felt like you had the people who had been there for a long time, a lot of really good people, and then guys like Theo Epstein, who it might be the greatest executive of all time, and then he comes in and he brings his best people, and it just was like such a perfect mix, where you kind of had like the guys that were there and the guys that were coming in, and then you had the Ricketts family infusing money and this attitude like, hey, it matters now, we're not here to just to be the lovable losers, we want to win, and it all came together, and then the toughest thing in sports, and going back to Alabama again, and I got to give Nick Saban credit because I've never seen anyone better at this in my life. But when you do win, forgetting that you won and getting hungry to win again. And I don't think the Cubs did that. I don't think the Cubs did that. I think that's why they had to break the team up, to be honest with you. I think that it's like it was such an enormous accomplishment that it was hard to take the step back and say, hey, I'm going to put this ring down and I'm going to be focused on kicking ass again today. Yeah. That somebody else is out there and they want to take my spot and I'm not going to let them have it. We just never recovered from that with some of the best players that will ever play and wear that Cubs uniform. Right. And I think that's kind of why I think it wasn't just the players, it was the entire organization. From top to bottom, and it's tough when you accomplish something that you're never going to beat ever. There's no more, there's nothing else. That those guys, they accomplished it twice. They beat the Bambino and then they beat the GOAT. What else is there, right? And I'm not putting the blame on anyone. It's disappointing looking back now because, God, I can't tell you how much I loved watching Baez and Bryant and Schwarber and all those guys and what they mean to me and what they mean to me as a Cubs fan and what they mean to me as a broadcaster and all that stuff. But this organization is going in the right direction. And I don't know how it's going to translate this year, but I'm telling you, they're going to develop some big time players before it's all said and done. And, and that's probably, for me, having been covering this for so long, the most exciting part of being around the 2022 Smokies and, in the Cubs minor leagues.
Mick, can we close with a little rapid fire here? So let's say your broadcast career fails tomorrow. So not true, I know, but how you paying your bills?
Yeah, that's a good question. I still do football stuff. I guess if you're saying if I don't do any kind of broadcasting, what would I do? I'd probably be a sales executive. One thing you have to learn in broadcasting is how to go out and sell things. So I would probably make a lot more money if I wasn't in radio.
What's your favorite minor league ballpark of all time?
Oh, yeah. I'm in it right now. The Montgomery Biscuits Stadium, Riverwalk Stadium in Montgomery. They built the stadium in an old train stop and a whistle stop, right? And it's an historic site. My son's fourth grade went on a field trip to Montgomery, Alabama, right? And we see the Rosa Parks Museum. We go to Martin Luther King's church, and we do all this really, really cool stuff. And then we go there, and I'm like, hey, I work here, right? And it was a Confederate prison during the Civil War. It's right on the water. The way that they constructed the place is amazing. And it's just got so much history in there. And honestly, I feel like if I was there late at night, I'd probably run into some ghosts. But it's cool. There's actually like train tracks that are behind the left field wall. And, on certain days, guys hit home runs and it hits the trains, the train cars. So it's fantastic. If you were going to make one trip down here, that would be it. And then there's one other stadium I got to give a shout out to. There's a place called Rickwood Field in Birmingham. Mm-hmm. It's not where the Barons play the regular season games, but it's a stadium that's older than Wrigley. It's the oldest, stadium I think that's out there. And they play one throwback game there every year. So on occasion, we'll be the team that plays in that game. It's called the Rickwood Classic. And it's so much fun. Like you're back in time. The players love it. Willie Mays played there, Babe Ruth, and all those guys. So it's cool. And, Cubs fans would definitely get it.
Sure. You're rarely in the stands for a professional baseball game, but if you are, what's a must at the concession stand while you're watching a ball game? Or in the booth, I guess.
Yeah, no, I'm in the stands. Look, throw me in the bleachers at Wrigley, hanging out with the guys out there. I've got to have a cold beer or two or three, just depending on how hot it is and what's going on in the game. I like to high five. I'll heckle once in a while. Nice heckle. I'm not a mean heckler. And, I'm not a big hot dog guy, partly because I've been in so many ballparks over the years, but nothing better than a Chicago dog. So, if I had a Chicago dog every day, I would do that. So I love those.
Mick, last one. You can broadcast 9 innings of baseball with one person and one person only. Who are you picking to be sitting next to you in the booth for that one ball game?
Wow. So is this like one person forever? Like
no,
they have to be alive. They have to be alive.
No. Anybody, you name it, your dream 9-inning game. Who you in the booth with? Oh, maybe it's a 3-man booth. It's up to you.
Yeah. Look, if I could go back and be the third man on the Harry Carey Steve Stone calls, and Harry would have to like me because I know that he didn't like everybody. So sure. He'd have to like me. Like he'd have to get me. And with that said, you know what? Doing a radio broadcast with doing 9 innings of radio with Ron Santo would have been awesome. Like one of the best things that ever happened to me was when Ron Santo introduced me to Billy Williams, and we had the Alabama connection. We're still friends. Every time I see him, doesn't matter who he's talking to, he stops and he yells "Roll Tide" at me. That all started with Ron Santo and the dugout at Wrigley, years ago. I didn't get a chance to work with him, but I just loved listening to him. And let me say this, and as a broadcaster, everything he did was wrong. I mean, like it was like what they it's like everything that they teach you to do as a broadcaster, he didn't do it. You're supposed to do this, do this, do this. But he was so genuine and it worked. You could turn the game on and tell by like just his inflection if the Cubs were winning or losing. If he was like, "Oh shucks," if he had that "oh shucks" voice, you were winning, or if he was excited, it was either close or in your head. So I guess him, and then I know I'm not supposed to give 3, but the other guy is Chuck Thompson, who was the Baltimore broadcaster and a Hall of Famer. He was my mentor. I got to meet him as a kid, and he would talk to me on the phone and teach me broadcasting. I don't even know why. I mean, thinking about how life is now, I don't know that there's many kids that would have that experience to get to do that. But and then of the guys that are there now, Ben Ingram of the Braves, one of my best friends. I would love to be in the booth with Ben, and we have the same sense of humor. We laugh at the same stuff. He'd be really fun to work with. Wayne Randazzo, another good friend of mine with the Mets. So it'd be fun to work with somebody that you really like and you get too.
Mick, can't thank you enough for the time. I could sit here and talk Cubs ball with you for hours, but we appreciate it. Cheers to a great season, and we'd love to catch up with you down the road if we can.
Yeah, anytime.
Mick, thanks again. Mick Gillispie, voice of the Tennessee Smokies, longtime member of the Cubs organization. Best of luck the rest of the way. Thanks, Mick.
Hey, no problem. Great to talk.